The best racing driver in the world suddenly stopped steering. No braking, no correction. His car drove straight into a concrete wall at 211 kilometers per hour. Officials blamed a broken steering column, but then something strange happened. The onboard camera footage cut out 1.5 seconds before the crash, and no one has ever fully explained why. The data recorder went missing. Evidence at the crash scene was moved before investigators even arrived. The trial lasted 13 years, and in the end, no one went to prison. This is what really happened at 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. Of the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, Ayrton Senna is leading the race. His Williams approaches Tamburello. Not really a corner at all, more like a long, sweeping curve that drivers took flat out, just full throttle, at more than 300 kilometers per hour. Now watch the onboard footage carefully, because something happens just before the corner. Something that has never been fully explained. A tiny movement, almost imperceptible. And then, the car begins to drift wide. There is no braking input, no steering correction. The car simply stops responding. 3 seconds later, it hits the concrete wall. The impact force, 211 G, 211 times the force of gravity, all in milliseconds. A suspension arm breaks loose on impact and is thrown back into the cockpit. It passes through the visor of Senna's helmet and into his skull. Formula One's chief medical officer, Sid Watkins, reached the car within minutes. Watkins was more than a doctor. He was one of Senna's closest friends. Later, he wrote that he knew immediately. He held Senna's hand and quietly told him to let go. Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead at 6:40 p.m. He was 34 years old. Now, before we get into how this happened, there's something you need to know. Something the official story leaves out. In the 30 seconds before the crash, Ayrton Senna was on the radio, and what he said, or what he didn't say, has never been officially confirmed. We'll come back to that. But first, you need to understand who this man really was, because without that, nothing that follows makes sense. 3 world championships, 65 pole positions, 41 race wins. But statistics alone cannot capture what Ayrton Senna actually was. Senna once described driving at the absolute limit as entering a kind of trance, a state where the driver was no longer consciously in control, beyond fear, beyond thought. His rivals said it was terrifying. By 1994, Senna had joined the dominant Williams F1 team. On paper, it was the fastest car on the grid. A 4th championship looked almost inevitable. But that season, Formula One had introduced new rules. Electronic driver aids were suddenly banned. The cars became harder to control, more unpredictable. And Senna's car, the Williams FW16, was especially difficult. Senna told his engineers the car felt unstable. He said something was wrong, that he didn't fully trust it. But those warnings never seemed to carry enough weight, because the crash on Sunday was actually the 3rd major incident of the weekend. And the 2 that came before it may have changed Senna's state of mind in ways few people realized at the time. By Sunday morning, the man climbing into that cockpit was not the same man who had arrived at Imola on Friday. Something had shifted. Something had broken. And the team sent him out onto the track anyway. Friday practice. Rubens Barrichello, 21 years old, Senna's own protege, went airborne at over 225 kilometers per hour and slammed into the barriers. He survived, but only barely. Senna was the first person to reach him. Eyewitnesses said when Senna came back to the paddock, he looked like a man who had seen something he couldn't process. Then Saturday. Roland Ratzenberger, Austrian, 33, making just his second Formula One start, suffered a front wing failure at Villeneuve Corner. His car hit the wall at full speed. He died instantly. It was the first Formula One driver death in 12 years. Senna tried to visit the medical center. He was turned away. He sat in his motorhome, alone, for hours. He called Brazil. He reportedly told people close to him that he didn't know if he should get in the car the next day. He got in the car. Before the race, he quietly tucked a small Austrian flag inside his cockpit. He planned to wave it on the victory lap, in honor of Ratzenberger. He never got to wave it. And now we get to the part that the Williams team has never fully explained. Because in the 48 hours before the race, somebody made a decision about Senna's car. A modification, a quick fix, done in the paddock, under race weekend pressure, without factory oversight. And that decision, that single decision, is what the 13-year criminal trial ultimately came down to. Senna had asked his team for more space in the cockpit. He felt cramped. His seating position wasn't right. The team's solution was to modify the steering column, cut it, and weld in an extension piece to push the wheels slightly further away. This was done in the paddock, not in the factory, not under controlled engineering conditions. By hand, under time pressure, by mechanics working a race weekend. The modification was never independently stress-tested. It was never certified. It went onto the car, and Senna drove it in practice, qualifying, and the race itself. The prosecution's argument, the argument that Italian courts ultimately agreed with on the facts, even if the convictions were later overturned on procedure, was straightforward. The weld was inadequate. Under the lateral forces of Tamburello at full speed, it gave way. The column broke. Senna had no steering. The car went straight. It was not an accident. It was negligence. Patrick Head, Williams' technical director, was the man who oversaw that modification. He was convicted. His conviction was later overturned, not because the court found he was innocent, but because the statute of limitations had expired. The time to punish him had simply run out. 13 years. And the only reason nobody went to prison was a legal technicality. 4 things about the crash of Ayrton Senna were never fully explained. The onboard camera cut out 1.5 seconds before impact. No technical explanation was ever given. The data recorder briefly disappeared. When recovered, parts of the data were corrupted. The raw file was never released. At the crash site, photographs show car components moved before investigators arrived. No one was ever required to explain why. And tire pressures, after 5 laps behind the safety car, were never examined during the official investigation. 4 questions, still unanswered. Over the years, theories have ranged from the absurd to the serious, but the most uncomfortable one is institutional. By 1994, Senna had become the strongest voice for safety in Formula One, openly challenging the authority of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. The FIA controlled much of the evidence, yet its handling of that evidence was never independently scrutinized. Is that proof of a conspiracy? No. But it is a conflict of interest that was never examined. And sometimes, the questions nobody investigates are the ones that matter most. And now, the detail I mentioned earlier. The radio transmissions from the final laps of Ayrton Senna. Williams' F1 team has always said the logs contain nothing unusual, but some who were in the paddock have long suggested parts of those communications were incomplete or sensitive. Nothing has ever been independently verified. Williams still controls the archive. Make of that what you will. What is not disputed is what marshals found after the crash. Inside Senna's helmet was a small Austrian flag, placed there for Roland Ratzenberger, who had died the day before. He planned to wave it on the victory lap. He never got the chance. After that weekend, Formula One finally made the safety changes Senna had been pushing for years. 30 years later, some questions remain unanswered, and the flag in his helmet was never waved. Some people believe the official explanation. Others think the story isn't finished. Where do you stand?